Sarah Martinez had always been the quiet one in her family. Growing up in a small Texas town, she learned early that keeping her head down and following rules kept her safe. At 28, she worked as a bank teller and lived a simple life until she met Marcus Thompson at a local diner. He was charming, confident, and everything she thought she wanted in a man. Marcus worked as a security consultant for wealthy clients, always dressed in expensive suits and driving flashy cars. He showered Sarah with attention and gifts, making her feel special for the first time in years. Within 6 months, he had convinced her to move in with him to his large house on the outskirts of town. The first signs of control started small. Marcus would check her phone, claiming he was just curious about her day. He suggested she quit her job at the bank, saying he made enough money for both of them. Sarah hesitated, but Marcus was persuasive, telling her she deserved to be taken care of and that working was beneath someone as beautiful as her. Soon, Sarah found herself isolated from friends and family. Marcus had opinions about everyone in her life, slowly convincing her that they were jealous of their relationship or didn't have her best interests at heart. He monitored her social media, chose her clothes, and even decided what she could eat, claiming he wanted her to stay healthy and beautiful. The house became her prison, though she didn't recognize it at first. Marcus installed security cameras throughout the property, saying it was for their protection. He gave her an allowance for groceries and necessities, but she had to provide receipts for everything. Her world grew smaller each day, revolving entirely around Marcus and his unpredictable moods. When Sarah tried to voice concerns or ask for more freedom, Marcus would alternate between sweet manipulation and subtle threats. He would remind her that she had nowhere else to go, no job, and no savings. He had gradually taken control of every aspect of her life, and she began to believe she was helpless without him. The isolation took its toll on Sarah's mental health. She spent most days alone in the house, watching television or reading books that Marcus approved of. She wasn't allowed to have visitors, and Marcus monitored all her communications. The woman who had once dreamed of traveling and starting her own business slowly disappeared, replaced by someone who jumped at shadows and second-guessed every thought. Marcus began displaying his extensive gun collection more prominently around the house. He claimed it was his hobby and that firearms were necessary for home protection. But Sarah noticed how he would clean his weapons when she had displeased him. The message was clear without words ever being spoken. Among his collection was an M107 Barrett rifle, a massive weapon that Marcus treated like his prized possession. As months passed, Sarah realized that Marcus's control wasn't about love or protection. It was about power and dominance. He enjoyed watching her confidence crumble and took pleasure in her dependence on him. She began to understand that she was trapped in a carefully constructed cage, and Marcus held all the keys. The turning point came when Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. Joy because she had always wanted children, and terror because she knew this would give Marcus another way to control her forever. When she told him about the pregnancy, his reaction confirmed her worst fears. He smiled coldly and said that now she could never leave him, that she belonged to him completely. That night, as Marcus celebrated what he saw as his ultimate victory over her independence, Sarah lay awake planning. She knew she had to find a way out, not just for herself, but for the innocent life growing inside her. The woman who had been slowly disappearing began to resurface, and with her came a determination that Marcus had never seen before. Sarah began researching domestic abuse resources on the library computers during her brief, supervised trips to town with Marcus. She learned about the cycle of abuse and recognized every pattern in her own relationship. The isolation, the financial control, the emotional manipulation, and the implicit threats of violence were all textbook signs of an abusive relationship. During one of these library visits, Sarah met Elena Rodriguez, a social worker who specialized in helping abuse victims. Elena noticed Sarah's nervous glances toward the door and the way she flinched when her phone buzzed with text messages. After a gentle conversation, Sarah broke down and confided her situation to Elena, who provided her with a safety plan and resources for when she was ready to leave. Elena explained that leaving an abusive relationship was often the most dangerous time for victims, as abusers typically escalated their behavior when they felt their control slipping. She gave Sarah a secure phone and taught her how to document Marcus's behavior without being detected. Sarah began secretly recording conversations and taking photos of Marcus's weapons collection, building evidence of the dangerous environment she lived in. Meanwhile, Marcus's behavior became increasingly erratic. He sensed something different about Sarah, though he couldn't pinpoint what had changed. Her pregnancy seemed to have awakened something in her that he found threatening. She was asking more questions, pushing back against some of his rules and showing flashes of the independent woman she used to be. Marcus decided to tighten his control even further. He installed GPS tracking on Sarah's phone and began following her on her trips to town. He hired a private investigator to monitor her activities and report back to him. When he discovered she had been visiting the library regularly, he became suspicious and forbade her from going anywhere without his direct supervision. The pregnancy also triggered Marcus's paranoia about Sarah leaving him. He began making veiled threats about what would happen if she ever tried to take his child away from him. He reminded her daily that he had connections in law enforcement and the legal system, implying that no one would believe her if she tried to report him. He also made sure she saw him cleaning his guns more frequently, particularly the M107 rifle that he claimed could hit a target from over a mile away. Sarah realized that Marcus was becoming more dangerous as her pregnancy progressed. His need to control her was intensifying, and she began to fear for both her life and her unborn child's safety. She contacted Elena through the secure phone and began making concrete plans to leave. But every escape route seemed blocked by Marcus's surveillance and threats. The breaking point came when Sarah discovered that Marcus had been drugging her prenatal vitamins with mild sedatives to keep her compliant and drowsy. The betrayal was complete. He was not only controlling her life but potentially harming their unborn child. That night, as Marcus slept, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She had been secretly learning about firearms during her research, understanding that knowledge of Marcus's weapons might be crucial for her survival. Elena had connected her with a former military instructor who taught women's self-defense courses, including firearms training. Sarah had been meeting with this instructor during her supposed medical appointments, learning not just how to handle weapons but how to think tactically about dangerous situations. The instructor, a woman named Captain Maria Santos, had recognized something special in Sarah. Despite her situation, Sarah had natural instincts and a steady hand. Captain Santos had taught her about the M107 rifle specifically, knowing from Sarah's descriptions that it was part of Marcus's collection. The weapon was powerful but also complex, requiring specific knowledge to operate effectively. Captain Santos also taught Sarah about precision shooting and the psychological aspects of self-defense. She explained that accuracy came from mental discipline and emotional control, not just physical technique. Sarah absorbed every lesson, knowing that her life and her child's life might depend on these skills. As Sarah's due date approached, Marcus became increasingly possessive and violent in his language. He spoke about keeping her locked in the house permanently after the baby was born, eliminating any possibility of her leaving. He described in detail what he would do to her if she ever tried to take his child away, and his threats became more specific and credible. Sarah's opportunity came when Marcus received a call about a security job that would take him out of town for 3 days. He was reluctant to leave her alone, especially so close to her due date, but the job paid exceptionally well and his client was insistent. Marcus arranged for his brother Jake to check on Sarah twice daily, but Jake was lazy and predictable in his timing. Before leaving, Marcus made his threats crystal clear. He showed Sarah the M107 rifle and explained in graphic detail what the weapon could do to a human body. He told her that even if she somehow managed to escape, he could find her anywhere and that the rifle's range meant she would never be safe. He wanted her to spend his absence thinking about the futility of any escape attempt. Sarah waited until Marcus had been gone for a full day before putting her plan into motion. She had memorized Jake's schedule and knew she had approximately 6 hours between his visits. Elena and Captain Santos were standing by with a safe house and legal support. But first, Sarah had to deal with the immediate threat that Marcus posed. Working quickly, Sarah accessed Marcus's gun safe using the combination she had observed him enter dozens of times. She removed the M107 rifle and 17 rounds of ammunition, along with several other weapons that could be used against her. Her plan was simple but dangerous. She would disable Marcus's ability to threaten her from a distance while creating evidence of his illegal weapons stockpiling. Sarah had discovered, during her research, that several of Marcus's firearms were modified in ways that violated federal regulations. The M107 rifle itself was legally owned, but Marcus had made unauthorized modifications that changed its classification. She documented everything with photos and prepared to turn the evidence over to federal authorities. But as Sarah prepared to leave with the evidence, she received a frantic call from Elena. Marcus had discovered something was wrong and was driving back home immediately. He had somehow learned about Sarah's visits to Captain Santos and was in a violent rage. Elena warned Sarah that Marcus was likely coming to kill her, and that she needed to get out of the house immediately. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. She was 8 months pregnant alone, and Marcus would be home within 2 hours. Running was impossible in her condition, and Marcus knew all the places she might try to hide. For the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt true despair wash over her. Then she remembered something Captain Santos had told her during their last training session. Sometimes the best defense is making your opponent believe they have the advantage, while you prepare to take it away from them. Sarah realized that Marcus expected her to run or hide, but he would never expect her to stand and fight. Sarah positioned herself in the house's upper level, which provided a clear view of all approaches to the property. She had studied Marcus's tactical thinking during their time together, and knew he would approach the house cautiously, expecting either to find her gone or cowering in fear. He would never imagine that she might be waiting for him with his own weapon. The M107 rifle was heavy and intimidating, but Sarah's training took over as she checked the weapon systems and loaded a round into the chamber. Her hands were steady despite her pregnancy and fear, and she felt a strange calm settle over her. This was the moment everything had been leading to, her chance to break free from Marcus's control forever. Sarah thought about her unborn child and the life she wanted to give them. A life free from fear, control, and violence. A life where they could both be safe and happy. These thoughts strengthened her resolve as she heard the sound of Marcus's car approaching in the distance. As Marcus pulled into the driveway, Sarah could see him through the rifle's scope. He was moving carefully, scanning the house for signs of her escape attempt. He had a pistol in his hand and was clearly prepared for violence. Sarah realized that her instincts had been correct. Marcus had come home to hurt her, possibly to kill her. Marcus began circling the house, checking all the doors and windows. He was following his security training, being methodical and cautious. Sarah watched him through the scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger, waiting for the right moment. She had 17 rounds in the high ground, advantages that Marcus didn't know she possessed. Marcus entered the house through the back door, moving with the confidence of a predator in familiar territory. Sarah could hear him calling her name, his voice alternating between false sweetness and barely contained rage. He was playing psychological games, trying to manipulate her emotions even now. But Sarah had moved beyond his ability to control her feelings. From her position upstairs, Sarah watched through the rifle scope as Marcus systematically searched the lower level of the house. He was carrying multiple weapons and had clearly come prepared for violence. When he discovered that his gun safe had been opened and several weapons were missing, his mask of control finally slipped completely. Marcus began screaming threats that echoed through the house. He promised to kill Sarah slowly if she didn't surrender immediately. He described what he would do to their child, using their baby as leverage to force her compliance. These threats confirmed everything Sarah had suspected about Marcus's true nature and eliminated any lingering doubts about what she had to do. As Marcus climbed the stairs toward her position, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of fear or sadness, but tears of rage for all the months of psychological torture, for the stolen pieces of her identity, and for the future her child deserved. She had tried to leave peacefully, but Marcus had forced this confrontation through his own violence and threats. When Marcus reached the top of the stairs, he found Sarah positioned behind proper cover with the M107 rifle trained on the stairwell. For the first time since she had known him, Marcus looked genuinely shocked. He had never imagined that his controlled, submissive girlfriend could become a tactical threat. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and he struggled to process this new reality. Marcus attempted to regain control through his usual manipulation tactics. He spoke softly, telling Sarah she was confused and scared that pregnancy hormones were affecting her judgment. He promised they could work things out if she just put the weapon down and talked to him. But Sarah had heard these lies too many times before, and they no longer had any power over her. When manipulation failed, Marcus revealed his true intentions. He admitted that he had planned to kill Sarah and claimed that intruders had broken into their home. He had connections who would ensure the investigation went nowhere, and he would raise their child alone with a story about Sarah's tragic death. His confession was being recorded by the device Elena had given Sarah, creating evidence of his premeditated murder plot. Marcus then made his fatal mistake. Believing that Sarah lacked the courage to actually use the weapon against him, he began advancing toward her position. He was confident that her feminine nature and pregnancy would prevent her from defending herself, even against mortal danger. He had underestimated the strength that desperation and maternal instinct could provide. Sarah gave Marcus multiple warnings to stop and leave the house, but he continued advancing while making increasingly specific threats about killing her and their child. She realized that there was no negotiation possible with someone so completely consumed by the need to control and dominate others. Marcus would never stop hunting her, never stop trying to destroy her life. When Marcus raised his pistol toward Sarah, she made her choice. The M107 rifle fired with tremendous force and Marcus fell immediately. Sarah had been trained for precision, and her shot had been perfectly placed to end the threat he posed. The sound echoed through the house like thunder, marking the moment when Sarah's nightmare finally ended. In the silence that followed, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year: complete safety. The man who had stolen her identity, isolated her from everyone she loved, and threatened to kill her child was no longer a danger to anyone. She had used Marcus's own weapon to break the chains of control he had wrapped around her life. Sarah called Elena immediately, reporting that she had been forced to defend herself against Marcus's attack. Elena contacted the authorities and Captain Santos, who both arrived quickly to support Sarah through the aftermath. The recording of Marcus's threats and confession, combined with the evidence of his illegal weapons modifications, painted a clear picture of what had really happened in that house. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Marcus's criminal activities and psychological manipulation. Police discovered detailed journals where Marcus had documented his control techniques and plans for keeping Sarah imprisoned permanently. His computer contained surveillance footage from cameras throughout the house, showing months of Sarah's isolation and his psychological abuse. Detective Rebecca Mills, who specialized in domestic violence cases, recognized immediately that Sarah had been the victim of severe psychological abuse and had acted in legitimate self-defense. The evidence was overwhelming: Marcus's illegal weapons, his recorded threats, and the physical proof of his surveillance and control systems throughout. The house painted a clear picture of a dangerous predator who had finally met resistance. Sarah was temporarily hospitalized for observation due to her advanced pregnancy and the trauma of the confrontation. During her stay, she received visits from other women who had survived similar situations. Their stories helped Sarah understand that she was not alone, and that her experience, while extreme, was part of a larger pattern of abuse that many women faced. Captain Santos visited Sarah in the hospital and told her something that would stay with her forever. She explained that Sarah's precision with the rifle had been extraordinary under such stressful circumstances. All 17 rounds had been accounted for, but only one had been necessary to end the threat. This demonstrated remarkable discipline and training, proving that Sarah had acted with appropriate restraint even in a life-threatening situation. Elena helped Sarah navigate the legal system and connect with resources for rebuilding her life. The domestic violence organization she worked for provided Sarah with temporary housing, legal support, and counseling services. They also helped her understand that healing from psychological abuse was a process that would take time and professional support. Sarah's family, who had been gradually cut off during her relationship with Marcus, rallied around her when they learned about her situation. They expressed regret for not recognizing the signs of abuse sooner and promised to support her as she rebuilt her independence. Sarah's mother moved in to help care for her during the final weeks of her pregnancy. The media attention surrounding the case sparked important conversations about domestic violence and the resources available to victims. Sarah's story became a symbol of resistance against abusive partners. though she was careful to emphasize that violence should always be a last resort when legal and social systems fail to protect victims. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Sarah gave birth to a healthy daughter she named Hope. Holding her child for the first time, Sarah felt overwhelming gratitude that they had both survived Marcus's attempts to control and destroy their lives. She promised her daughter that they would build a life based on freedom, respect, and love rather than fear and manipulation. Sarah began speaking at domestic violence awareness events, sharing her story to help other women recognize the signs of abuse and understand that escape was possible. She was careful to emphasize that her situation had been extreme, and that most victims should seek help through legal channels and support organizations rather than confronting their abusers directly. The legal proceedings concluded with Sarah being cleared of all charges related to Marcus's death. The district attorney declared it a clear case of self-defense against an armed intruder who had threatened both Sarah and her unborn child. The evidence of Marcus's criminal activities and abuse was so extensive that no jury would have questioned Sarah's actions. Captain Santos offered to continue training Sarah in tactical skills, explaining that many abuse survivors found empowerment through learning self-defense techniques. Sarah accepted, understanding that knowledge and preparation were tools that could help prevent her from ever becoming a victim again. Sarah also began working with Elena's organization, helping other abuse victims develop safety plans and access resources. Her unique experience gave her credibility with women who were still trapped in controlling relationships, and many found inspiration in her story of successfully breaking free from seemingly impossible circumstances. 2 years after that terrible night, Sarah had built a life that seemed impossible during her darkest days with Marcus. She had completed her college degree in social work and was working full-time helping other domestic violence survivors navigate their escape plans and healing processes. Her daughter Hope was a bright, curious toddler who would never know the fear that had dominated her mother's life before her birth. Sarah had purchased a small house in a safe neighborhood with the help of victim compensation funds in her new career. The house had good security features but felt nothing like the prison Marcus had created. It was filled with natural light, family photos, and the sounds of Hope's laughter. Sarah had slowly reconnected with old friends and made new ones, who knew her story and supported her healing journey. The shooting range had become a place of meditation and empowerment for Sarah. She continued training with Captain Santos, not out of fear but as a way to maintain the confidence and skills that had saved her life. Other women in similar situations often joined their training sessions, learning that knowledge and preparation could be tools of liberation rather than weapons of war. Sarah had also become an advocate for legislative changes that would better protect domestic violence victims. She testified before state committees about the need for stronger enforcement of restraining orders and better training for law enforcement officers who respond to domestic violence calls. Her testimony was particularly powerful because she had experienced both the failure of traditional protective systems and the extreme circumstances that could result from that failure. The 17 shots that Sarah had prepared that night had become a symbol in her advocacy work. She explained to audiences that she had been prepared to fire all 17 rounds if necessary to protect herself and her child, but her training and discipline had meant that only one shot was required. This demonstrated that proper preparation and training could make the difference between survival and tragedy. Hope's second birthday party was filled with people who had become Sarah's chosen family: Elena, Captain Santos, other survivors from the support group, and Sarah's reconciled biological family. As Sarah watched her daughter play with other children, she reflected on how different their lives might have been if she hadn't found the courage to fight back against Marcus's control. Sarah had learned that healing from abuse was not a linear process. Some days were harder than others, and she still occasionally had nightmares about that confrontation. But she had also learned that trauma could be transformed into strength and that her painful experiences could become tools for helping others escape similar situations. The house where Marcus had held Sarah prisoner had been sold, and the new owners had no idea of its dark history. Sarah occasionally drove past the property when visiting Elena's office, but it no longer held any power over her emotions. It was just a house where bad things had happened, not a place that defined her identity or future. Sarah had started dating again, carefully and with the support of her therapist and friends. She had learned to recognize healthy relationship dynamics and to trust her instincts about people's character. The man she was seeing, David, was a teacher who worked with at-risk children and understood the importance of Sarah's advocacy work. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and support rather than control and manipulation. On the anniversary of that night, Sarah always spent time alone reflecting on the journey that had brought her to freedom. She would hold hope and remember the moment when she realized that her daughter deserved a life free from fear and violence. That realization had given her the strength to do what was necessary, even when it seemed impossible. Sarah's story had spread beyond her local community through social media and news coverage. She received messages from women around the world who had found inspiration in her experience. Many told her that reading about her courage had given them the strength to leave their own abusive situations or seek help from law enforcement and support organizations. As Hope grew older, Sarah planned to tell her daughter an age-appropriate version of their story. She wanted Hope to understand that sometimes people had to fight for their freedom and safety, but that love and determination could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. Most importantly, Sarah wanted Hope to know that she was conceived in love and born into freedom, regardless of the darkness that had preceded her arrival. The M107 rifle that had been Sarah's tool of liberation was now secured in evidence storage, but its significance lived on in the lives that Sarah continued to touch through her advocacy work. 17 rounds had been loaded that night, but only one had been needed to end a cycle of abuse and begin a journey toward healing and hope.